I'm Clint, and welcome to Swatches Livestream number 64. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the finals of the Sword and Owl Art Challenge submissions. They have had about a month in order to do these images so far. We took a look at the concepts 2 weeks ago, but now we're going to see how they finished them up, and if there's any final feedback that we can give in order to help them improve. If you're new, then welcome to the channel. I'm your host, Clint Arlee, professional illustrator and art educator, and we're trying to help you guys be able to get into the art field, improve your artwork, and answer your questions. Now, the layout here of what we're working on is a art challenge. I came up with a couple of outlines for people to follow in order to help push you guys in directions that maybe you wouldn't normally go. And I'm serving as both the art director and your art teacher, and just trying to be there for you and help you guys get some answers. Just double checking my settings, make sure everything looks like it's streaming okay. I'm not getting any drop frames, so that looks good. If you have any questions that you want to toss to me while you're here live in the chat, then feel free to do that. Start your question with the word swatches so that it will flag it for me, and I will try to answer it during the course of the program. We already have a dozen people in here, it looks like. Thank you guys very much for joining in. I know everybody has a lot of things that they could be doing on a Friday evening or night, and the fact that you're coming out here and joining me, I really appreciate it. So we have Nuo. Hey, how's everybody doing? I'm doing pretty good. Ty, Michael, Forever Broken, Bas DeVries, Anna, good to see you. Robert, Avatai, Anna says, Swatches, directly a question at the start. Did you see that some patrons said they would rather wait for the new content instead of being slimmed down? How will we go about it? Okay, good question. Let me go ahead and mention that. It's sort of an announcement, so I'll do that right up here at the front. So a lot of Swatches, this art channel, is basically supported by the Patreon. So if you want to support this channel and also get some good exclusive content, then go out to patreon.com/swatches. I'm currently working on a how to paint materials video, and I had anticipated it being finished by now, but my schedule is always at the whim of my clients. So if the projects that I'm working on for clients get changed around, I do have to allow my schedule to be shifted around and make for that. And I've had one project get extended. They wanted some additional things done with it, so that tacked on a couple of extra days. I also got sick, so that lost a couple of days, and another one has been delayed because a different art director took over the project, and so it sort of had to go back and get started again. All that said, I apologize for the delay, but also thank you for your patience. Everybody's been very patient, very kind about it. And I said that I'd probably be condensing some of the content in the video in order to get it out sooner. And people are saying they would rather have wait. I get that. I understand where you're coming from, but it also runs into the issue of if I delay very much longer, I'm going to be running into the time that's set aside for other things. So as much as I might like taking as much time as I would, want to, that's not always the option that I have. So I've got to try to keep it on, some sort of schedule in order to make sure it's freed up by the time I have other projects starting. So the way that I'm planning on slimming it down a bit is, instead of creating entirely new examples to illustrate some things that I'll be talking about, is just using snippets from some artwork that I've already done. And that way I'm not having to rehash and make new stuff. I will simply be exampling off of pre-existing material, and that should save me a bit of time. Anna says, I'd also not mind if you made part 1 and 2 split it up between 2 months. Well, that's not a bad idea, as if I did a 2-part version of it. Anna, that's actually a really It's a really good thought because it does split pretty cleanly. Right now I'm approaching it, and there's two different ways that I'm going about it. And one is I have basically one document where we're going through, I say one document, I'm putting together a bunch of kind of slides and examples that I'll be going through the video and talking through the points on all of those. And the first part is where we're talking about all of the principles involved in the topics of effectively painting materials. And if there are things, a lot of things are about light behavior and how materials behave under light. Talking about matteness versus glossiness, talking about reflections and how reflections work, talking about difference between like opacities, translucency, talking about how light is bounced off of things and color bounce, all of this stuff. Then the flip side of that, after we talk about all the principles, is showing a bit more examples of this is how you go about painting some of the most common things. And also showing probably some before and afters. So it's a little more practical on that side. And I really think in order to do the topic well, you need to do both of them, because I've watched a half a dozen videos on this topic, and it seems like almost everybody just talks about the practical side. This is how you paint wood. This is how you paint skin. But they don't talk about the principles behind it. So any one thing that you learn how to paint, almost nothing that you learn from that can be applied to anything else. Whereas if you can learn both sides, then you're really well covered in order to approach about any material that you want to. So I could follow that and just do the principles video this month and then put together the kind of the practical painting side of it for next month. I'll give that some thought. That may work out a lot better, and that way I'm not spreading it thin on one or the other. Yeah. Anyway, give me some quick feedback if you have any thoughts on that. I'll take that into account. Okay. I don't think there's a lot of other announcements. Oh, hey. Happy news, Swatches just passed 2,500 members on the art Facebook group. So thank you guys. That's awesome. Hand for us. Thank you for being part of the community, getting in the art challenges, and also just being so supportive to each other. Every day I'll go out there, I check the group. I don't, comment on everything. I don't have the time to do that, but I do see that you guys are really making the effort to try to answer questions and give constructive criticism to each other. And there's always the possibility that people can take that very wrongly, but in almost every case, people have been very supportive of that. So thank you for just building, giving a care enough to build a good community. So that's not something I can do by myself. I just try to jumpstart it. So awesome. Okay, before we get into looking at the finals, I think most people like to start by seeing what the new art challenge will be. So this episode will be wrapping up the Owl and Sword challenge. Then we'll be starting a new challenge. Tickets will go on sale tomorrow. If you are new to the channel, you're unfamiliar with the format, let me give you a quick rundown of how it works. In order to get your artwork reviewed in an episode like this, or the last one, then what we need to do is have you purchase an e-ticket. I make them e-tickets because one, my time is worth money, and two, I have to limit the number of people that submit stuff. In the past, I just simply started receiving too many submissions. I could not possibly go through them all. So there are 12 tickets that will go up for sale tomorrow. And if you want to be part of the challenge, you may purchase one of those. If you want to give a shot to the challenge without purchasing a ticket, you won't receive a review from me, but you're just inspired to do it, you want to join it as part of the community, then all of the files will be open for you to download. The outlines, the inspiration images, all that stuff will be made available. Links will be on the Facebook group, swatches.group will get you to the page. and you can go download those and do those at your convenience. So let me move my mic out of the way and I can get here. We're going to have the Machine and Giant Art Challenge. I had previously mentioned possibly doing a machine kind of steampunk mecha thing, and so that'll be one of them. And let me pull up the outline. So here we go. I will pull, minimize that one, and I'll pull up the examples too. Okay, so these are some inspiration or examples I pulled up. None of those are mine. I just pulled stuff off of ArtStation and other sites. So, choose either the Machine or Giant Challenge. For the Machine, depict a medieval mecha over a blank background, as you can see on these. The mecha should be autonomous. It is not being driven. Now, this example does show like a little dwarven guy running this one, but I think the Machine is good. We're just not going to have a driver like you see in that one. And will be powered by steam, coal, or some magical means. The magical means, maybe those glowing crystals, maybe there's some sort of arcane, symbol or sigil in the middle of it. Maybe it ran on fairy power. I don't know. What have you come up with? The Machine is for warring or as a city protection. It should have some signs of weaponry visible. Whether that's a couple of blades, just a menacing claw, some sort of ballista, javelin, whatever you want to come up with. Now, the form of it is fairly open. It can be bipedal or quadrupedal or spider-like, but not track-based like a tank, not all wheels or tracks. This machine is older and should be well weathered. Grind, dust, rust, and scrapes are all appropriate. Now, this is a character feature challenge, something that you might see in some kind of monster manual or, creature manual. So, not a big background. It's not a scene. It is to feature a character like you see here. So, good design and clarity is prioritized over action. We don't need it, flying through the air, shooting missiles and all of that. We just want to see a good, cool creature. It's not a creature machine. For the Giant is a portrait challenge. In this portrait challenge, depict a high concept version of a giant. That is, it is a really well rendered concept art version. Framing should be limited to the collarbone and up and have a flat tone background, as you see in these over here. The giant should have a brutish and slightly misshapen appearance. Consider pushing the features towards an ogre or simian, like an ape or orangutan, direction to modify the look from just basic human features. Experiment with skin tone variation options and or include face paint and old wounds. So, like on some of these things, just like the exaggerated features on this guy up here, I believe that was concept art for the movie BFG. This is more of a ogre or troll direction. You could take it that way. Of course, this was concept art for, I want to think this is concept art for one of the Planet of the Apes movies. I could be wrong. But you could go more that direction. This is probably a little too simian. But if you split the difference between that and human, then you would have a really interesting kind of middle ground of what we're looking for. Now, on the character, if you do want to show just a little clothing around the shoulders, that would be okay. Maybe he has like a big bear skin on or some leather or roots, or I don't know what you want to come up with. But if it's something simple, you could do that. We are going for something towards the realistic side. Now, the machine doesn't necessarily have to be as realistic. You could go a bit more stylized with that. We have just not done a proper portrait challenge in a long time. And I didn't want to do just a straight portrait, because what we would have is people just finding a image that they like and basically copying it. And there's not going to be as much learned from that. So that's why I went with giant, because we get to understand and use a lot of the human forms, but you get to experiment and be creative with it, and also get to meld it with some other things. So there's more creativity involved, and I think it's a better use of being able to experiment and push your artistic skills. Now, I didn't mention the lighting here, but lighting is something like you see on these. Let's keep away from getting too dark. It's similar to the previous one where clarity is a big issue. So we want to make sure that we can understand. I do have just male versions of the giants on this. That's what I came across, and that's the images I have saved. But if you do want to do a female giant, that's fine as well. Either way. Now, I don't know if you can really convey the size of the character by just, the head, but that's okay. You don't necessarily need to show some normal size things, so it looks like a giant, but that's okay. And then of course you will have the files with it. Oh, a note on the due dates. This sketch, you will have 3 weeks for the sketch, because in 2 weeks I will be out of town. So we're skipping the Friday in 2 weeks, and then we'll be picking it up that next week, and that's when the sketch will be due. Then following will be another 2 weeks as normal for the final. So just for you to know on that. 6 of the tickets should be going up about noon tomorrow on the Gumroad store, which is just go to swatchesart.com, and the tickets, 6 of them will be available at that time. And then the remaining 6 tickets will go up for sale about midnight tomorrow, so people on the other side of the world can get it when they're actually awake. Am I going to Lightbox Expo? I wish. That sounds like a really great event. I am actually going to be at the Star City Games Magic the Gathering tournament down in Dallas, Texas. So I will be exhibiting there. If anybody's in the area and they want to come by and see me, then come by and see me. So I'll be there on Saturday and Sunday in 3 weeks, 2 weeks, something like that. So this is what that challenge will be. And then the challenge that we're going to be taking a look at right now is they had the choice between either the Kinslayer's Sword or Odru the Owl. One is a Ice Blade from the Frost Giant Warlord, and the other is the Lord of the Owls. And it was pretty open as to how you wanted to take that. So let's jump into it. I don't see... Let me double check, make sure I just haven't missed any questions. And it says, the giant is meant to be humanoid and made of flesh, or would you like to see a more elemental approach? No, more humanoid, made of flesh. It really is just like a human portrait, but it's a human variation. So, no, not made of... He's not made of dirt or anything like that, just regular humanoid. Now, if you want to give him, a different color skin, or some sort of patterning to his skin, something like that would be okay. But let's keep it regular flesh and blood, bone, hair, that sort of stuff. Okay, those were just resources. Let's go to the finals. Okay, so first up, we have Arlee. I really like the way that this piece has developed. You do say here that you tried to finish it, didn't have quite enough time, had some other stuff come up. So there are some of the owls that are left more unfinished, but I will assume that you can go complete those, so we're not going to talk about those very much. And my initial reaction is very positive to this image. I think it's quite successful. You've hit a really good appearance of the animated cell characters with the painted background. It's a very endearing sort of scene, and it's very much something that I would expect to see out of a movie. So I think you've done very well on that route. You said, in addition to addressing your feedback, I tried to improve the perspective and tighten my values into 3 distinct groups of light, medium, and dark. I think it's very well. You listen to what I had to say. I think you've implemented it well. And the background, I think, fits a lot better with the scene now. I really don't have much to say about improving this image. I think you've thought through all of the major issues. You've made ways to deal with them and improve them. So it's a good sign of saying there's not that much that really needs to be done here. You're doing well, so just keep in mind what you have learned from this piece. But we'll step through a couple of things. The perspective does feel better. I also think that the light, medium, dark, and the way that you've handled the background works a lot better, because one of the things that I felt was a little off in the concept, which is the guy over here, was that this was so well lit and nice and warm, but yet the background looked like it was nighttime. And there was this kind of discontinuity between the two. And you've basically corrected that here. And just, okay, the background's a little more blue, foreground's more warm, but that's a common animation, way to do things. So that's okay. The color difference is okay, but now the light levels is more balanced, and it overall feels like a more positive scene, which is pretty cool. Okay, small things. Going also with your distinct groups. The foreground here is very dark, and then the midground has more brightness here. The background gets lighter in tone. So light, medium, dark works very well, and just the way that you've used the warm and cool. So next up, number three. I feel like this guy's maybe a little forward heavy, that most of his weight is on this side, and his feet are so far back from underneath him. So I wonder about trying to get his feet up under him a little bit. Like if you were to, I just copied and shifted that. Like if his feet were under him a little more, that might feel like he's not leaning over so much. Or if we get a little more wing or body back here to kind of offset it. Or if his body goes, back sooner, and then it's like he's sticking his head out to look down. So you're basically tilting his head out, but not his entire body. Sorry for hitting the mic there. That's a small thing, so just be aware of that. Consider that. Another thing is the size of the owls. We've already established that this guy's massive. He's supposed to be. And then we've got a couple of, medium size. This thing's already 3 times the size of a human. Okay. But then we have these guys that are just, they're almost the size of ants, right? By the time that you get this close to the camera, I assume this guy is about a normal owl size. So that's throwing the depth off a bit. It's really playing with the size. I don't even know that she's supposed to be normal size at this point, because we've got owls way bigger and way smaller than they're normal supposed to be. So my suggestion is to make none of the owls smaller than a normal owl. Maybe this guy should be as small as a normal owl is, and maybe this is a baby owl, but he would need to be that big. And not going down to little micro owls. Because then I just really don't know how big anything's supposed to be. And then maybe you just have the big one, and then his medium-sized friend. And then these guys need to be all normal size, which they're probably a little big compared to her for being normal size. So consider just how that's affecting kind of the perspective in the sense of scale. The last thing is a small issue, and that is just a kissing line right there, tangent. A tangent where this is running right into the back of his neck. So one of these guys probably needs to shift a little bit one way or the other. Maybe this comes down there, or maybe he shifts over a little bit, or maybe he shifts over this way a little bit. But just make sure that those aren't running right together. I think this guy works right here really well. In the previous version, he was kind of grabbing a lot of attention there because he was so centered. And this, I think, works really nicely. So, excellent work here. And I'm loving the direction that you're taking with this. And I have, full confidence that you will finish it up and it'll be wonderful. So, could you do both challenges, or is that not allowed because we do have an extra week? No, just do one because if everybody does two, you've essentially just doubled the entries. So, yeah. Now, if you want to do the other one for yourself, absolutely go for it. But just pick which one you want me to review. Okay, Anton is next. He says, I'm trying to make this part of a already existing painting, which is why he's using the vertical format. I had suggested doing a horizontal because the main content of the scene is horizontal. But that's fine. If you're part of a series, the series is vertical, completely understand. So, cool beans. Next, you said, my idea was to make it look like whenever a light ray passes through the sword, whatever is lighted by the reflected light gets a frozen. I need to zoom in on that. Hang on. Oh, yeah, you were saying that you didn't want it to just feel like anything in the vicinity became under its ice power, but that anything that any light that goes through it, the light then makes icy the thing that it lands on. I don't think that was reading specifically that way. If you wanted to do that and try to do that more effectively, I'm not sure that it would really come through. But kind of going back to the overlay and treating it more like a prism. So you have, a bit of light coming through here, and then you have the light being kind of broken into a couple of different shades, and then you make a little more overt with that light cutting through these and hitting those items. I mean, you could do it a bit like that, and that might connect a little better along that route. But I do really like your rework of the sword. I think that is an overall better shape. The twisting metal vines in it is a nice contrast to the ice itself. It does feel like a nice big chunk of ice, so the effect works quite well. And overall, I'm quite happy with the scene. I think it's pretty cool. Michael says, maybe have a snowflake come down off of it where the light touches it onto the surface that are getting frozen. Yeah, it's just a little difficult to show like the light is causing it, because if you even started adding snowflakes coming off of it, I still would default to, it gives off an aura of frozenness. And I wouldn't necessarily attribute it to light. So, yeah. Number 3, just saying that good design there. Number 4, I made those lines. Oh yeah, just talking about the light coming through that. Number 5, This guy we could probably get to stand out a little bit more. Just the way that things are balanced in this scene right now. Putting maybe just a little atmosphere, a little light back behind this side. This is a small thing, but we just help that to pop out a little bit. We're already establishing there's a decent amount of frost in the air. So letting that lighten up a little bit around the pedestal. Maybe grabbing some of those blues. So it's kind of like a low line frost that's hanging around the bottom here. And just pulling that out a little bit. It's a small thing, but along that way. Okay. The whole thing still feels like a little desaturated. I would push it up a little bit. If in doubt, I would always just ramp up the saturation. Like you could increase that by 30 and you're a long ways from being really colorful. So it's almost completely gray. And I think it just works better if you have a bit more color into it. Yeah, take a look at prisms and how the light cuts through those. But instead of going to the full spectrum of colors, consider trying to shift it so that it's only cool colors, and how that pattern works when it plays across other surfaces. That's not what I meant to click. I meant to be up here. And see what kind of pattern that makes on things when the light comes down on them. I haven't really researched that, so I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. But that's a possibility. Trying to think of some other way to show that. That's about what I've got. Again, this is another one. I think it's largely successful. So you could also use some bounce light or some cool light maybe coming up and bouncing on this if you wanted to account for some bounce light. But that's kind of personal preference. Anything else here? No, I think it's good. So not a lot of feedback there. I think you've got a good image. It's doing what it needs to do. It's an interesting weapon. I do like your overall lighting with it. So just let's push up the colors a little bit. Maybe a little more atmosphere just to bring that table forward. Consider using some spectrum fragmented, light coming through there, and just making sure that the frost and ice is only forming on the direct areas where that light is hitting. Yeah. You got some really cool runes and stuff on your concepts. We don't really have any down here. That would be a small thing, but maybe coming back in and just establishing some sort of little rune pattern going across these, because we've lost almost all of that. And that was really some nice detail. So let's get that back in there. Andy, let's pull up to your comments here. Should we add some green light on the foreground? I would add green light in this lake. It would be reflecting more of that green tone. So in the water coming up here, I don't know why I listed it as 4 there, but that would be a good thing to do. I really wouldn't put much or any green light in the trees and etc. Number 2, should the trees receive more light from the moon? If they are just normal trees, no. If they have snow on them, yes. but I don't think you have snow in yours. It's like you see over here, it's really only the snow that's picking up much of the light, but the trees themselves are quite dark and not very reflective. So just treating them as silhouettes is perfectly fine. You don't necessarily need to try to build much more than what you have. You establish a little texture, a little form to it, and it's probably fine. These guys, since they are snowy owls, generally a lot lighter, then yeah, they can pick up more light, but not necessarily the trees. Number 3, one of the things I would think about doing here is maybe adjusting the sky a little bit. And it's like, if you look at some of these images, we have the sky goes from a light to dark tone very evenly across the sky. And here, it feels like it's getting really fragmented, where it's like going light to black, and then light to black. But it's not necessarily the aurora effect that's brightening it. Like the sky itself, the regular blue, is getting lighter and darker. Every one of these has its own little gradient, and it's like it's restarting every time. So if we were to use a lighten layer, then we could make it so that anything down here is, the darkest thing that can be there, we can paint it. So if we set this to lighten, and then I paint this, there isn't going to be any black sky that close to the horizon, right? It's going to be more like this. That's as dark as it can get. But then as it goes up, the allowable darkest part of the sky gets lighter. So I can paint that. And then as it gets up, what you probably want to do is even darken up some of this. And then that green is going to stand out even more. I have to figure out where you want the darkness at which point across those. So, and then it would be more consistent gradient to the overall sky, and we're not having fragmented gradients up and down through the whole thing. Okay, number 3, number 4. Oh yeah, just saying. Also, you could think about introducing a little more color. We basically just have the blue and the green. Even up here on these, you were playing around with some other colors on the horizon. I don't think that's a bad idea to play with. So if you wanted to come in and introduce, like, there's just a little hint of warmth down there that was still along that horizon, and you're just catching a bit of that in the lake. And then as the lake comes down this way, it's picking up a bit more of that green reflection. So you get pushing a little more color into it, but probably not a lot. We don't necessarily need, bright colors back there, but maybe you want to go that direction. Also, on the owls, they seem really striated in this sort of contouring way, and I'm not quite seeing that pattern on these guys. Consider adjusting that a little bit, where it's going to be more about the feathers going, like this, because they're going to be going down the body. It feels like the feathers are going side to side rather than up and down. So we can have some of them be dark, and they actually get like darker on the ends. I would say look up some tutorials on painting feathers. You'd likely start down here and then paint your way up so that you're layering them correctly. Then you can do things like they're lighter on one end and they get dark on the other end of the stroke. And then I just feel like, yeah, they almost have this wooden striation sort of look to them going sideways. So just watch that. Unable to connect to chat. Hang on, guys. We'll see if that will reboot. I don't know if I'll lose connection with that or not. Sorry for the technical, but it looks like it's still going. Okay, so you can see me. I just had lost connection to the chat, and I didn't know. All right, well, that's what I've got on this one. Andy, I think it's a really beautiful way to take this challenge. It's certainly something that I had not considered. I think it's a beautiful connection between the kind of the owl spirit and the aurora borealis effect, or I assume it's Aurorus and not Australis. Anyway, it's a beautiful image, and when you finish it up, put it out on the Facebook group. I'd love to see what you end up doing with it. Okay, next up. Jacqueline Kerr. Okay, hi Clint, really enjoyed this challenge. It was something very different for me. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And yeah, I think it was for most people. We don't do animals very much, so cool. A couple of thoughts here. First up is, where's number one? Okay, we have a little style kind of clash between these where a lot of this is obviously hand painted. And then we have this really textury sort of effect going on here. And it's basically just really basic tree shape with a bunch of scratchy patterns on it. And I don't think it's reading very well. So I'm going to suggest you go look at animated movie backgrounds, illustrated trees, not necessarily how to paint a really realistic tree, but look to see how you can kind of stylize a tree and indicate some detail and some roughness without using this really grainy effect, because it's not really working with the rest of the image. And figure out how you can go in there and paint that sort of effect without trying to texture your way into it. That would be first up. Number two, watch how these legs are working. A owl leg is going to work differently than a human. I think you're having a little misunderstanding about the anatomy there. Like even if you look at, this guy, you've got essentially, oh, that's on smoothing. Like that is really delayed. So you got that coming down here, and then it goes backwards, and then it comes forwards, and then you have the talons. And you have like that, and then it's going back right there, and then it's coming forwards, and you have the talons. And so here the anatomy is just off a bit. Like we would have the big thigh there, and then it would be going back, and then it would be coming forwards, and then we'd have the talons. And same thing, you can kind of look how that other one would be doing that sort of thing. So double check your anatomy, make sure you're working out how that leg works, and that'll be better. I do like his gesturing. I feel like he's trying to really tell him something. He's like, oh, listen to me, I'm the king. So that's good. That's a better feel there. Let me pull back. Yep. Okay. Number 3, another one with tangents, where we just have. Sorry. I don't know, phone beeped for some reason. We have this running right up into that tree, and then we have that one running right up into that tree as well. So it'd be best probably to take this guy out. We can leave the feathers going up, but let's just take that guy out so we're not running right into something. Then you might want to move and have the feathers coming out slightly beyond that, so they're not ending right on each other. It is also good to take a look at how feathers work. They don't really get pointy like that. The feathers, I mean, if you were to look at them, they have sort of the structure in the center, and then you have the little hairs that come off of it, and they do that sort of thing. And the pattern is that they all go pointing out towards the end, so they're all doing this. So they don't really become pointy on the end like that. You could tilt a feather so that it's way more this way, you know, and then you've got it from flat to, you know, this sort of thing. But I still don't know that it'd quite make that shape. It really wouldn't curve back on itself. So check how kind of that's working. And then you might want to also adjust so that you have like the little creases occasionally that are telltale signs of feathers, you know, doing that. Okay, next up, number 4. Number 4, this also kind of just goes into 5 as well, so let's talk about both of these. And that is just the lighting and kind of the overall mood. That this feels like a fairly jovial, positive character. This isn't like some sort of villain. And it's funny expressions from these guys, but the whole thing is fairly shadowed. Like it's kind of a shady thing going on here. And he's in shadow. The brightest thing is the background behind him, where I'd kind of expect him to be lit. So we either need to run much more into the sinister route, where maybe he's even more in shadow, or we go more of what you have here, which is kind of the iller green tones. Because right now it's sitting right between being this warm, kind of happy scene and this really shadowed, little slightly sinister scene. So let's step one direction or the other. And that kind of goes to these as well. You've got these really bright, like violently bright green little grass things up here. And they are more vibrant than anything else in the scene, and they're not any of the focal points. So they're really grabbing attention away from some of the other stuff. And it would probably be better to bring like the brightest thing in the scene maybe should be his eyes. Right? That really bright yellow eyes. And if that was the brightest thing, then it would draw you into that subject matter. Robert says, can the mech be on a dark background so long as we aren't rendering out a full scene? Yeah, that's fine, man. Yeah, certainly if you're going to have like a lighter metal to it or something, then yeah, something to contrast against it. Mainly it's just, I don't need an entire scene with it. And it's not about creating necessarily a big mood. It's more about, let's just showcase the mecha itself. So that's fine. Okay, number 5. So yeah, just kind of thinking about the lighting, and also look at how they, went about painting some of these trees, you're eluding detail, you're stylizing bark. You're not necessarily trying to create all the detail of the bark. Same thing with the leaves, etc. Okay, Jacqueline, I think that you're really doing good to push yourself with this. If it was a challenge for you, then it was exactly what you probably needed. So continue working on it. Make sure you don't stop right here. Make sure you go back, take the opportunity, learn a bit about owl and animal anatomy with their legs. Take the opportunity to learn how to render and draw out feathers a little better. And also just what the illustration options are and how to go about painting things like bark and trees, and compare how different artists do that. So you have some options. Daniel Ruger is up next, and we start by taking a look at his comment. He says, my goal is to become a professional illustrator. What do you think is the most important thing for me to improve to reach that point? Then you mentioned your website, and while this isn't necessarily the time for a portfolio review, I just took a look at your gallery and taking a look at your piece here. My suggestion is, I think you would do well to take some classic art courses, some traditional drawing courses, and that would give you a foundation I feel like you're missing with all of your fantasy work. And I think you're still thinking very 2D about a lot of things. So if there is a course that you can take online, or maybe there's something that you can buy and you can just watch the episodes and do what they say, that would be probably time well spent. Maybe there is some sort of art class locally that you can do, a portrait drawing class, anything on that line. So I want to see you fall back and learn some of the traditional approaches and some of the good foundations that those things can teach. And then that's really going to step up a lot of your fantasy portfolio sort of things. On this particular piece, let's start by saying the lighting. Dramatic kind of lighting coming down like that absolutely can work. Don't have any problem with that. Only I think you've pushed it just a little too far, where it's so contrasty, where there's basically only light and black. So I would adjust it. I just grabbed yours and then I moved the middle up a little bit so that we got some midtones back into it. I think this doesn't really lose anything. It's still a really dark moonlit scene, but we're not losing so much of this to black. This is what ends up feeling really fragmented, because there's really nothing connecting anything from to anything else. Let me use a different color here. So we have like this light thing, and then this light thing, and then that light thing, and then that light thing, and we have a light thing here, and then a light thing here, and we have some little light things, but these are all there. But nothing is really touching anything else. There's nothing tying any of this scene together. But if we can raise up the values just a little bit in the midtones, then now we don't have disparate, different pieces. We do have still a high contrast, but there's more, like I said, tying it together. So that would be a quick adjustment that would help out. Number 3 is, this is another one dealing with scale. Okay, we accept Odru, Lord of the Owls, is huge. Cool. And I want to accept that this guy is normal. Cool. But these guys don't fit either way. This thing is as big as he is, or bigger, certainly with the wingspan. So now we've got confusion. Which is normal? Is Is he little? Is this big? Are these big? Are these normal? So we need to establish that something is normal size. So this needs to be made smaller and be normal size to him, or he needs to be made bigger to be normal size to those. But I'm going to say that all of these guys and these guys and this guy all need to be consistent to each other. And then he can be the exception. He can be the big one. So however how you want to do that, making these smaller, making him bigger, half and half, is going to be a good call. Number 4. This gets into feathers as well. Certainly when it's even more high contrasty, they read slightly more like blades, which I know they're supposed to be feathers. But if we can help push that idea a little bit and look at trying to indicate just a little bit of the rib, I don't know what you call it, the feather rib, and then maybe having just a couple of the little spots where the feathers are kind of splitting across there. And if we were to look at these from kind of the, flat on, then you've got this sort of thing. Usually one side has a taper that's slightly different than the other side. It's not always completely symmetrical. And then if you've got a little split where the little feather hairs aren't sticking to each other. I did not mean to draw that on that layer. Oops, hang on. There we go. Because remember, this is just a series of a bunch of like essential little hairs that like to stick to each other. But if a couple of them, due to, wind or whatever, pushes some of them apart, then we're going to have this guy coming up here. Okay, cool. And then this guy and the next guy get unstuck a little bit. So he's going to go up here. But because he is now essentially going further, distance-wise, from here to here is a certain length. From here to here is further. But this guy isn't longer than this guy, so he has to stop sooner, which means that this rounds like that earlier. And so you see this pattern where it'll go boop, boop, wherever the next one is. And then it kind of rounds in to have that sort of thing going on. And then the patterning, of course. I do like the patterning. We don't want to get rid of that. Because if you get rid of that, it really does look more blade-like. And so each one of these has different little spots that goes across them. And you keep that. But also make sure that if they do split a little bit, that patterning needs to offset to follow that adjustment. This is also feeling a little weird to me, and it is one of those tricky things where if you're going to start trying to mix animal and human anatomy, it's going to get a little weird. I didn't really think about it. I didn't sketch anything, but I'm going to just say that's something that needs some attention, and see if there is a way that you could get a wing to fold that way. Because it feels like it's supposed to be both a wing on the end, but an arm in the middle. It would be better if it looked like the whole thing is a wing. And I would have to play around with it for a while to see if I could figure out how to make that look normal. but that's just my charge to you. Figure out how to do that a little more effectively, and I think it's really going to elevate the overall scene. Now, I do really like the way that you're handling some of this light. Once we brighten the scene up a little bit, you've got some wonderful tones in here, some little color variations. The eye glow is working really well. I like the expression. It gives him a lot of character. I also particularly like the way that you're handling some of the lighting on this fellow, and he has the dark face with the yellow eyes. That's super cool. I like these guys just sitting back here watching. A small thing would be, let's get another level pass on this staff here. It looks a little plasticky right now, and it would be good to be able to go in here and add another layer of detail of just some bark. I would probably just use my little color changing brush and just go over it. So there's some variation, and you can do some big strokes, some little strokes, and just break it up a bit so it's not so smooth. And then you could also do some small things like maybe there is, let's turn that off for a second. Maybe there was a spot where, there was a broken little limb that used to be there, and then it has some wrinkles. They really do look like wrinkles that kind of form around it as it grows around that spot. And then you can have some unevenness there, and then you can go in and just add some lines, break it up, and it gets a little more bark-like. This is really smooth on the edges, and the edges would be a good spot to try to come in here and add a little variance, a little bumpiness, so that it doesn't read as quite so smooth. We could even think about adding, like maybe there's a little vine, right, that travels up this thing. Maybe a slightly different colored green, more like a yellow green. And then it could even have like some little leaves on it or something, and it just kind of a little ivy, right? A little ivy plant that circles around on it, and that would just make it feel a bit more natural, and not so, like I said, quite so plasticky. Okay, that wraps it up for that one. Very successful scene, a lot of good choices being made, and good stuff, man. Keep going with it. Am I missing anything else? Take a look at the big. Good advice. Well, thank you. I'm glad you're finding it helpful. Next up is Bas DeVries. You say, there are still some small tweaks I'd like to make here and there, like rendering the small owls in the background. Okay. I will assume that you will go back and handle that. But overall, I'm really happy with this piece. I am too. Beautiful piece. It really is. A lot of creativity here. And I think the way that you took the feedback and melded it with your idea was very successful. So I really do get more of the feeling of we're running into sunset evening time, and then the owls coming in and kind of bringing in the night. It's a beautiful scene just with the color palette, all the flowing lines, and the star effect that you're putting in there. So I agree with you. The main thing is just sharpening up a little bit of it, refining some of the things like the background clouds and the other owls, maybe refining some of the colors of the star effects, refining some of the feathers. Like this is nice and refined here. I'd kind of like to see a bit more of it have that treatment. Number 2 says, how does one go about using perspective when there is no horizon as a guide? Thinks in advance. That's a good question. I don't think that's necessarily one I've really talked about. So there are a couple of things that you could do. Depending on how accurate you really want to be. So let's talk through a couple of options here. And this applies to, most people. So I'm going to copy and paste that to its own layer. And I'm going to make it smaller here. And then, there we go. So if you have a scene where the horizon is far below or above or whatever your visible area, we'll say below in this case, then what you can do is make a smaller version of your scene, like I've done here, and then put that over a larger canvas area. And then you could run your lines. Let's make that a little smaller. And then you say, okay, there is my horizon. And then, whatever you want to run perspective for, you could do it that way. I'm not making this accurate to this picture, okay? I'm just giving you the thought process here. And so that way you can run your lines and go, okay, well, that's essentially what I want. I did not mean to do that on that layer, though, because I need to keep going here. Let's do that again. So you would then run your lines based on where you want your vanishing point and horizon to be. And then I could just copy that and then up here. And then I know that that is accurate to my little one, so I would just need to expand that to, match the big one. And then there we go. Because otherwise you can't run your lines far enough off your image to get to your vanishing point. Now, if you have a vanishing point that's, here, within, your visible area of your canvas, like just off of your canvas a little bit, you might be able to do it. But if it's as far away, that you can't get to it, then yeah, making the smaller one, getting it up there, running your lines, and then just copying your lines and then putting them back over your normal size and scaling it back up. So that's a good way to do it when that's an option. Another thing to do, if you just kind of spitball it, just eyeball it, I guess, then you could get, that's a layer, yep. Oh, no, turn that back on. You can make a series of lines. We're just getting them all horizontal here. Let's just set them to like linear dodge so they all show up. And then once you do that, what you can do is just use this distort until you get it to whatever perspective you want for your scene. So maybe you want, your eye level to be here. Say you want your eye level to be like towards the middle, and then you want it to perspectivize up and down from there. Okay, then that means and you've got something like that, all right? And by starting with something that has them all uniform in their lines, then you can just grab the side and distort, the shape of it. And now all of these are going to be in the proper perspective if you're trying to get, in this case, a depth perspective going into the distance. And you're like, oh, well, this part of this wing needs to go to that part of that wing. I'm not saying that's what needs to be done here, but that's another way that you can do it. I was trying to think if there's anything else on that topic. I might have already mentioned it, but there was an episode, Doki Doki Drawing channel, where the manga artist did running perspective for the sky. That was kind of interesting, where essentially he had a, let's do it this way because I don't have enough room. Like in this case, he would say, oh, I've got my horizon here. Then I want, say that I want vanishing point here, then he could toss in some lines. Well, that's going to be too far off. You're not going to be able to see anything. Let's say it's here. That's super rough, but here we go. And so the idea is, okay, well, I need to sketch some clouds. And you can start by drawing like a cloud here, but then to help give this sense of depth, then the next cloud that's here needs to follow to that same spot on those same lines, so that even something as arbitrary as a cloud, you can make sure that they all feel like they are showing the right amount of depth. So anything that gets lower to the horizon, is getting smaller, and anything that's getting higher is getting bigger, essentially. So you can use a little perspective that way by trying to get depth with your clouds going into the background, and that's a nice effect. Okay, pull that off. What else do we got? Any more notes here? Number three, I feel like his feet are maybe a little big. I could be wrong, but I was like looking at the size of his, I guess they don't have feet, talons, compared to like his body and his head, and I feel like yours are maybe a little big. So I'd say scale those down, but 10 or 15%. Number four, this is where the background, right now we've kind of got this pattern of the clouds doing this sort of thing, which just doesn't seem that useful. I feel like it might be more effective if we use the clouds to point us forwards or backwards. Like if we had some clouds that were kind of following the action, some little high cirrus clouds that are, wispy, kind of up here, then these clouds are sort of going this way. I did this same sort of thing on one of my magic images, not Gisela, Bruna. The same sort of thing in the background on my Bruna image. And then that way it essentially draws more attention to them because they're in the middle of this converging, design. So that would be one option. Next up, the face. I wouldn't say it's a problem, but it does catch me a little bit that the face and the body are not the same angle. So the angle that the body is turned at is, this guy right here. Now you didn't use the face that's looking at us, you've turned the face. But you haven't turned the face so that he's looking forwards. You've turned the face so that he's just slightly off of forwards. And that makes me feel like you just didn't match the head to the body. Now, obviously his head could be there, but it seems like if you're going to have his head turned, then just properly turn his head. Or if he's going to look forwards, then have him look forwards. But just having it slightly off feels more wrong. I don't think you necessarily have to repaint the whole thing. You could do a rough, quick transform warp that would get you part way. So, that's obviously a very quick kind of rough way to do it. But now it feels like his face is more turned to the direction that he is going. I'm not sure the form on these guys. I think that kind of drops back. and does something like that. So that would feel like he's looking right the direction that he's going. That would be the last thing. So, beautiful image, very, very picture book. Just kind of pretty image that it's nice to paint sometimes and not have to do something really dark and fantasy, you know. All right, finish it up there. Next up. Rodney Vani, welcome back. Tried to incorporate the changes. The eyes are off. I wanted to add necklaces. Going to do that. Okay. I have some improvements here. I feel like this is a little of a mixed bag. There are some things that are better now, but I also feel like you maybe started overthinking a little bit because your previous concept, I think, had some stronger points than the current concept. The glowing eyes were certainly more interesting and made him feel more mystical in the original. And the patterning on the wings was more engaging than the current one. So, and let me say, this is something I run into all the time. I am certainly someone who overthinks things, and that's one of the reasons that I save a lot of progresses along the way, because quite often I go back and incorporate earlier versions before I had too much time to think about it, and I bring the best of the different stages together for the final image. So let's talk about what maybe would be the best marriage between the different, elements that we have. The lady here, definitely better. So we definitely want to keep where we are with her. Really nice sense of blowing hair here, as well as with the cloth. You've done more work with the lighting and the necklace, etc. So that's all really nice. The legs, okay, good. We go with that. There's just more interest and more color in the previous version of the owl. So in most of the things on the owl, I feel like they were better in the earlier version. Excuse me. But we also need to think about the lighting and the colors going on, because in this one, we did have the warm light. And so you had that distinct warm, cool kind of dynamic playing between the two of them. Here, what color is this light? This light is really colorless. It's brightening things, but it's not changing them or tinting them, which just is starting to gray things out. And it would be better if it was pushing colors one direction or the other. Is it a bright golden light? Okay, then make it a golden light. It can be a cool light, a blue light, or a soft green light, moonlight. But right now, it just feels like it's making everything gray. And a lot of that is coming from the background. So we can have the background be non-intrusive, but right now it literally is just gray. And it's not really doing anything. And a lot of it is setting in tones that don't necessarily help bring out the subjects. So, let's just use this guy. So if we had some more color back here, we don't necessarily need a lot of color, but even a little color is going to help add some. And then having things like the light feather against the lit hair and the light fabric and having a darker background for them to play off of. Then they can go back in here and silhouette against this mountain range, which under a moonlight, things like mountains and trees all just become almost silhouettes. And then we have it getting light to dark in that pattern, which feels a little off. So we're probably going to have more of a silhouette. That's not going to just brighten up down there. And unless there's a lot of atmosphere, things aren't going to lighten up in the air around a light source. So what we get is, say that you want to go for more of a kind of teal. So you can have a little glow like directly around it, but not necessarily this whole thing, right? You had just everything was kind of grayed out. So instead, we're going to just use more of a pump of color around the things that it's lighting. And then if it is lighting them from the front, it's probably going to shadow back behind the legs. And then you want to make sure we get that pop of color there in the eyes. Maybe the rest of the eyes are dark. I'm just playing with it then. Okay. Then the sky, let's keep the sky away from just being gray. Let's add a little color. Maybe it shifts slightly to a bluish tone. I don't know. You have so much of that green. Yeah, probably a little more to that green. And yeah, watch these earforms. Right now we have basically the halo of light going around evenly on everything. And light just doesn't do that. It has to follow the form. And I have a feeling that your earlier version of the ears is probably closer with it like being around that shape a little bit. So, something like that. 3, 4. Yeah, those are basically the points I was wanting to talk about. So let's go back to the earlier version of the wings. If you want glowing eyes, do glowing eyes. If you don't. It's not a make or break thing. But we do need to figure out what the lighting here is with this. What color is it? And if it is a light source, then let's play into the fact that it's a light source. So either make it just light nothing, or let it have, making like basically light nothing but itself. That it can have this little glow just to itself, but it's not really bright enough to light anything else. Or you can make it a proper light source and it's going to be lighting up, all that stuff in that area. So yeah, necklaces, something like that to give him a little more, sentience would be nice. They've got this fly. I don't know why these flies always show up when I'm here. Yeah, this thing felt more like a harness than decoration. So the fact that he's coming to grab this necklace and he's got other necklaces, that would be a good tie-in to be like, this is something to do with this character. So it's good work, man. Yeah, let's just not overthink it too much, and make sure that you're saving your progresses along the way so that you can go back to them if needed. Next up, Madao starts with comment saying, any tips on edge control, where to soften or loose some, especially on hard edges or hard surfaces where the edge is all hard, right? Well, on most hard-edged things like metal, you're not going to have soft edges very much. And you don't necessarily need to just try to force them in there. You're not painting in a style where you're using a lot of mixed edge types unless they're super obvious. There are some styles that are very painterly, and they use a variety of different kinds of brushes to create, different kind of loose effects. And that builds in a variety of edges, but that's not what you're doing at all. So a couple of rules of thumb for edges are anything that is in motion, you might consider softening the edge to. A leaf is blowing in the wind. You might try to soften it out following the motion of its movement so that you give the illusion of that movement. Number two, it is a good way to show and convey the physical surface texture of something. Like hair or fabric, you probably want to soften the edge of it. Even though it might not be that visually soft, it is a way for the viewer to have a sense of the physical surface quality. The next would be something that is rounding away. So even if you had like a metal ball, then, it could be proper metal, except you might soften the edge a little bit just to indicate the rounding of the form. And that's the other thing is it could be a hard surface like a steel ball, but you might also soften the edge slightly because it is a rounding object. And therefore, anything that has a planar edge, like a box, you can't see that color at all. Anything that has a planar edge, like that, you're going to have hard here. But if it is like a cylinder that's going away from us, you might soften this edge a little bit because you want to indicate that it's going around and it's not ending in a flat edge, that angle. So that's a couple of guidelines about when to do that. Number two is kind of the design of the sword, and maybe I'm overthinking it a little bit, but it's a little inconsistent because it feels like the sword, like the ice really isn't part of the design, or that this side of the sword is visible, but I get the impression that the underside would not be. I feel like if you saw this in a cross cut, the sword is, cross section of the sword is something like this, I guess. Then the ice is like coming off of here like that. But why isn't there ice on this side? There's only ice around one bottom side of the blade until it gets down here, and then now it goes around the top. So it feels like it either doesn't go over the top at all, and it only should come off the sides, or it needs to be going around the whole thing the whole way. So it just feels a little odd with that. If you do encase it in ice, then yeah, you lose a lot of the detail and stuff in there, but that's kind of the nature of the thing. If you do change it so that you have the metal visible, then we want to make sure that the blade is visible, ever how long that blade is. I'm not entirely sure. And then we probably want to refine this edge. This feels really bulky on the end and doesn't follow any real pattern. So consider trying to, work in some sort of flow to it. Like maybe it has something like that where one side sort of offsets the other side, and then it feels like this is sort of a blade shape in itself, and then this is sort of a blade shape that builds off of that. And then it only ever comes up and gets close to that groove, but it never fully goes across, the end of it. So, okay, a couple of thoughts on the design. Number four. Number four, the background could use a little more separation between the elements. They were all just about the same value. They were about the same color. And I'm going to suggest trying to add a little more separation. Like this aurora effect really could be brightened up a lot more. I don't think you're going to take away much from the sword. The sword is so big, it is so centered, that it's not like you're going to not know what this image is about. And it doesn't all have to be bright. Just a couple of points there, letting it bright up, and then letting it contrast against that mountain back there a bit. And we can also have that mountain have some more atmosphere to separate it from this particular ice wall. Or the other way, right? This wall could be a little brighter, and that mountain back there could be all silhouette. So just pulling those forms out a little bit. Same thing up here, where maybe the top of this is catching more light. And watch that effect and the patterns that this ice makes. Look how rough those are. It's almost like a rock pattern, because the erosion basically works the same way. The structure of the way that it clumps together and sticks and breaks off, basically the same thing that you have with dirt. So, look at trying to go in there and add some of the variation in that. And you just look at a little piece and, copy out some of the patterning from your source image. So, very good on that, Vidal. I'm liking it. I think you have some really good design going on with the blade itself. A lot of clean work being done there. So let's just separate out some of the background and also refine how the ice is being used and what shape the ice itself is in. Next up is Jonathan Monroe. You were saying that you had started off going a MTG style, but you lacked the required skills and ended up going more stylized. That's fine. I said it could be more stylized. Hearthstone as an initial painting, pushed it towards a Hearthstone style once I realized it wasn't working. I think you're fine, and I think I mentioned in the first time around that it had a really nice stylized version, so going that way worked fine for this image. So number 2, your piece has flattened out in values quite a bit. So I'm going to suggest going back to some of the strengths from your color studies. Your value studies. Little fly, could you go somewhere else? So this has some really nice contrast. The blade really stands out. I feel like the light is coming off of it quite well. But right now, it doesn't have that much contrast. The dark in the background isn't nearly dark enough to make that light feel like it's really popping. So I'm going to suggest doing that sort of thing. I'd set up just a levels adjustment layer to lower the value of the stuff in the background and then leave that where it was. So that's a quick change, and it gets you closer to your previous value study. And yeah, small stuff. Number 3, the blade itself, the ice effect is not working real well. And that's something we want to make sure that we're getting. So I'm going to suggest going back and looking at some of these other ones and seeing what we could learn. I think the flies are liking somebody being in this room because most of the time no one's in here. And so if they smell somebody, they like want to come over and check it out. Like maybe it's food. So here it is so bright, and we're losing any of the detail in here. And these edges are, I'm going to say, too uniform. They're all like this same length and the same kind of curve. So can we go back and get some more of the variance in this and also some more of the value difference? One of the ways that you can do it is by grabbing like your darker tone and working it in the negative. So instead of trying to draw all the lines in here the way that you want them, this is one of those things where sometimes it's easier just to try to draw the negative spaces. Yes, little fly, oh my goodness. And you want to keep them darker towards the middle. Now that one's kind of cool because he has like the striations that go a certain direction. That's not a bad idea. We kind of work that into it, like it breaks along a certain axis. And then you can layer it up by adding in more of the lighter tones. Here, maybe breaking that up a little bit. And then you find the ones that you like and you start breaking into those. And it's a matter of building up the form inside of it. It's the thickness of the ice and you build up the form. Then you come back on top and you add that top layer of sheen, like you see on these over here. Going in and establishing the dark bits on the inside and then coming back and adding something like that light glow and give me that, and the real shimmery bright parts that come across the top of it. Number 4, I just want to say that I really liked some of the magic effect going on, and it's a really quick, easy read of knowing that this is a magical item, and it's something that you would definitely see in a lot of online games, RPG kind of games. When you have a small image of a weapon, you need to really make it pop out and understand that this is a magical weapon from a quick image. So that's a really good effect that you've got going on there. Nice twisty shapes going up. Number 5. Also, I think the background, aside from the values being a little off, the background is basically what it needs to be. It is setting just a really cold terrain, and it's not trying to be overly busy or overly realistic. It's just setting the stage for this sword. So I consider that quite successful also. Some of this metal, I'm going to suggest dropping down the value. Let's keep some of the metal on the darker side. You can have some little pop values to it. Some of this, if we can let it go darker, then that blade is even going to seem brighter. And we're just getting a little simpler with some of the value ranges, not keeping quite so broad. So you have some sheens on some of it, and the rest of it wants to stay a little darker. Then that can make the little silhouettes on those guys stand out a bit better. So we just have the light like hitting off the middle portions of them. Yeah. I think this is a good piece, Jonathan. A little more work on the eyes. Make sure you're doubling down and looking at the references. This one also would be pretty cool. Like if you got, actually let's try something like this. Copy, paste. Nope, that did not copy at all. There. So something like that. And I'm just curious. And you can change it up, like using the spot healing brush, just paint it over, and then it's going to use its algorithm to try to figure out what's supposed to be there. So you can like modify the shape of it and just have Photoshop do the work for you. Yep. Okay, last three. Let's see what we have. William Hallett is up next. And William, I am using your little owl for the cover of this video. I can switch it out if you were not happy with that, but he makes me smile, and I thought he would look good on the cover. So, yeah. Lona says, thanks, Clint. I also need to try different brushes. Maybe a future Patreon tutorial from you. Tutorial on brushes? Is that what you're talking about? You're using different brushes? I'll clarify what that would actually cover. So William says, I feel like I'm learning a lot and learning to take time at each stage of the process and not move on until I'm happy at each stage. And I feel like it's worked out well with this piece. I still get confused with light and color, but I'll have to do a ton of color and light studies to get over that. Yes, I think you've done well for this one. Taking your time, thinking through what you wanted each step to be, finding a lot of resources, doing the sketches, doing the studies. And I tell you what, that can really alleviate a lot of the franticness to it, the hecticness of the process. And it's also kind of a sign of artistic maturity, is when you can just take it one step at a time and spend the proper amount of time for each stage before moving on. And you also say you get confused with light and color. We all do. We all do. It is the thing that you get to after you learn all the fundamentals. And light and color is about, now that I know how to draw things, what do I do with them? How can I actually make them into a narrative? How can I put feeling into it? And that's where light and color comes in. So, you know, good luck on the next 20 years of figuring that out. I consider this a largely successful image. Wonderful cast of characters here. It's well drawn, and the lanterns are working quite well. The color scheme's working well. No big changes here. So I'm going to just make some smaller suggestions about getting a bit more from this particular piece. But I think you're on a really good track with this piece. More so than I've seen on your other pieces. I think this is working really well for you. And this particular style is playing to something that, to my side, looks more natural for you and is a good meld between painting and the great lines and line work that you create in your great the draftsmanship side of it. So I personally am going to suggest continue in this direction with this sort of approach and rendering style. But that, of course, is entirely up to you. I don't know if you've even enjoyed it at all, this sort of rendering, but it's looking good from this side. So let's step through and talk about a couple of minor things. Number 3, this guy is just nothing. I don't really have anything wrong with this guy. I'm loving this guy. He makes me smile. He makes, you know who he reminds me of a little bit when I glanced at him when I first opened it up? He reminded me of the Ghost of Christmas Present from Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. Because he's all like jolly and happy and, you know, let's eat, let's have a good time, let's love everybody. And that's kind of how I get the feeling from this guy. Number 4 is getting to just the lighting and separating a couple of the different elements from each other. Because it's getting a bit busy and not busy. It's getting a little muddy visually. It's so little color and value variation in a lot of these different sections that they're not reading real well. And well, I do want to be cautious of making too much change because you do have a nice color scheme and you do have a nice lighting scheme going on. But let's just look at a couple of pushes that we can make to separate things out. That was the value scheme, yeah. Overall, the value scheme's working pretty well. This all separates out real well, but this doesn't. And that's what we want to play with. Okay. So this is a overlay layer. And that's the first thing that I did. Just pushed up a little more of the blue so that we can separate the ground and some of the background from the midground by having a bit more blue in that. Also cooling off some of the things like the mice and the butterfly and putting them more in the blue moonlight scheme and letting that that midground get warmer. So that, small. Next up is a hard light layer, which is essentially doing the same thing but heavier handed. The hard light can pull that off, particularly around the lanterns, and just giving them a nice warm glow directly around the lanterns. A little more painterly approach to it. And it's also more blue on these guys, more blue over here. You can tell that. So we're trying to separate the different pieces slightly, like, no, this layer. getting him to be slightly more blue, getting him be a little more green and a little lighter, and letting this stay darker and warmer, and letting the warmth of these, spill out a little bit. And then I just used a final normal layer and painted a little separation, like keeping the grass within a smaller range and not letting it go so dark so that it meshes into the values of some of the other areas. Then letting some of the more of the blue, cool moonlight light up some of the grass back here, and also some of the blue moonlight hitting down on like the little mice, and some might be added like to this leaf for that butterfly. So small stuff like that, just trying to help separate out some of the characters a little bit that way. You could just add more light, like from some of these lanterns. If you wanted to do that, that could work as well. If you want to add just some warm spill light on these guys and help kind of bring their forms out that way, and then let some of the shadows solidify the other shapes. And this is one where you could really start to overthink, okay, well, the light's coming from here, and then that light's coming from here, and then that light's coming from here. But you don't need to be that literal with this piece. So pick out, like here, oh man, I really want that edge to be more bright. Okay, then just play up the light from that lantern. But these two you don't necessarily need to treat as bright. So artistic license there. I am going to suggest that we cut down on some of the shadowing on her face. It's kind of an unusual lighting. Like, we got warm light coming down here, but I do know that she has the underlighting there. So overall, I'm going to suggest you just kind of flatten out the tone. So there's really not much light and shadow value changes on the face. It's more just about, the features showing up: dark lipstick, dark eyes, the eyebrows, drawing the edge into the nose there. And then you could let some of it go into shadow, right up underneath him, which makes sense. And then back underneath, which you probably would have hair falling back there. But not so much on the features themselves, or if you do, then just pulling off kind of the overall round spherical sense of it's rounding away from that light source. So it's kind of doing that sort of thing. And just simplifying her face so it's instantly readable from the distance. That's about all I got on this one. I was thinking of anything else. Yeah, like throwing these guys into more of the moonlit, a little cooler, and or darker, or maybe they're all a little bit darker, and then all of this could be just a little bit lighter behind them, so they show up kind of that way. And same thing down here, like really letting this stay more in the foreground. Okay, good stuff, man. Really, really beautiful. And I'm glad you got into the challenge. Nice to see that piece. Okay, next up is Vale, working on the Kinslayer blade. Number one, I tried to work with the darker values for the background. The mountains were not looking with enough depth. That's why I kept a little of the light on the back. That's fun. I think this is certainly an improvement over where it was. And so if you experimented with it and you found this to be the right direction, then that's what we should do. Number 2, this is a good block in for the shapes, the values, and the colors for the background. But now I'm going to suggest you go find some references for mountains like Yosemite or maybe some, Canadian mountains or the Alps or something. Because these are super generic mountains and they're just big slopey shapes. So see about going in, finding some references and breaking it up a little bit so that it has some more natural forms to it. So instead of everything having the same slopey direction, like if you look on these, there's bumps up and down. There is different kind of elevations and striations in the mountains so that the snow gets caught along I'm trying to think of the word, striations, I guess, in the strata of the rock. And the rock, erodes away in different patterns. So maybe that kind of has this pattern and then it would erode away so that it kind of breaks into different levels. And then maybe there's a tree line that goes further up on this one. And we're adding in just the natural variation that you see in nature, that's natural, and trying to create more natural ways that mountains kind of form and the rock patterns. And you just go in there, it wouldn't take too long to add in some natural variation to that. And that would really help step up the believability of that background and give it a bit more visual impact. Number 3 is the lighting is getting to adding a size problem. So what I see is this sword, which I generally accept as a normal size sword, except for the fact that it's touching the ground right here and it's lighting up the ground. Well, that makes it feel like this is the size of a skyscraper. Because that spot on the ground, there's a tree right here, and I assume that's a normal size tree. So if that's a normal size tree and that's the size of the sword, that sword's like 500 feet long. And that's like God-sized sword. So we either need to more effectively show that there is a huge difference and a huge distance between this plane right here and that plane, or we need to say this sword is nowhere near this foreground. The two of these have nothing in common. This is just free floating in space in front of us, and this heel just happens to be behind it. The two are in no way on the same plane. You know what I mean? So there's no way light from this could affect that because this is a quarter mile behind the sword. So one or the other has to be done. We have to establish the distance between those two planes, or we have to get rid of that light and then be able to show it by that way. Number 4, talking a bit about the lighting. Overall, the whole thing is getting a little grayed out, a little softened out. So this is a vibrance layer where we're just stepping up the vibrance of the scene by about 30. A little more color to it, a little more color pop. Then a curves to adjust the darkness. So we can let that go to more of a silhouette up there on the top, and that's fine. But this is kind of sitting in the middle. It's not really getting darker. So that might be a little better. And then you could do something like, you know, the light's coming over that side of the mountain, maybe. Like maybe that stays a little darker on that side. That. If you're not at, sorry, if you're not going to have the glowing down here, then we probably don't want this end to be quite that bright. So continuing on with this ice effect that you have, maybe even, sorry, I can't blow my nose. Continuing this metal down towards the end. I don't know if these two connect or not, something like that. Okay. Anything else? No, I think that'll do it for this one. Did some really good work on this, and you found a good balance with the background and the sword now, and a good color palette for the background, with the soft sort of warm peachy tones going against the grayish blues. I think that's working well. Last up is Tyler Vale. Tyler Vale. Not looking for any specific feedback. Okay, so on this one, you did mold between the human and the bird qualities. I think the hand is working a lot better now. It's not just a human hand with the bird face. You got a bit of that Talon feel to it, and I think that's quite more successful. That's a terrible way to say it, but okay. But where do we go from here? What's next? I think the major thing that this piece is currently lacking is second level, which is what I have right here. And that's just all the basic forms are established, all the basic lighting is established, but now we need proper detail. We need to go in there and start putting in some basic detail. Like this has a lot of good second level to it. It's all of these spots, the cracks, the individual scales, not even scales, but individual plates, the small variations in the patterning. And we don't have anything like that over here. Everything is very generalized, and that's fine. You're at this point, but now we need to go in there and start establishing some little more individuality to it. So pulling out some more individual hairs, kind of just detailing it up. Let a few of them stand out for being lighter or darker. Maybe there's some little patterns to it. And we're not drawing every hair. And in fact, you know, on something like this, I'd probably come back with my soften, do a pass of them, where you paint them, and you're just establishing different shapes in here, and then come back and soften out half of it. And then you come back after that and do another pass. You're just pulling out a couple little hard edges. And on these, what you were looking for is to have one end that's more in focus and sharper, and then letting it soften out as it gets to the other end. And it's varying that stroke opacity so it's softer on one side. Now, that would be a good way to start adding a second level to that particular area. And you notice that we're still keeping it right in that value and color range. Same color region, same value region, but we're just adding a little more variances within that. That same approach needs to be taken throughout basically the whole image. So, you know, as it gets down here, we're probably going to have bigger ones. And this is a place where we need to start establishing it. This is also somewhere, because it's rounding our way. We're talking about values earlier, edges earlier, where we can establish the fact that this is more rounded and not planar edge, letting that soften out a bit. And we can have some bigger feather types of shapes coming down here. All of this needs it up in here too. Coming in here and establishing horns are generally pretty rough. I mean, you can just come in here and start scrumbling in some little patterns. And this is also something where a lot of horns will have small ridge patterns going on them. They're not perfectly smooth. And I assume it has to do with the way that it grows and or structure. Like, the same way that we have reinforcements on bridges and walls in order to make it stronger, that having the ribbing and ridges down these things would intensify their strength by quite a lot. So that sort of thing, you can see the difference that that makes. That it goes from just this basic bland kind of tube shape to having a little more visual interest. Okay, next is how stylized or realistic do you want to go? You have things like this down here that have almost a black outline around these things that would not realistically have a black outline. Same thing on the edge of that, and then up here and on the edge of these feathers. If you want to do stylized, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but you probably want to play into it more and make it more distinct that you're using a mix of line and paint. And like, she would probably need to be lined, and then you might want to use lines kind of indicating that form over here, you know, that sort of thing. Or we need to really get rid of some of those lines so it's just straight paint. Right. And we're just letting the values themselves separate between the different elements. Next, on the white fabric is getting really contrasty, and the folds are really heavily darkened, and the white really isn't going to do that. Especially light that's hitting this white fabric is going to be bouncing off of itself and thus brightening its own shadows. So that stuff on the light side is going to be brighter. A rule of thumb is don't accent the darks in the light and don't accent the lights in the dark. So any dark that is going to show up in a light region or light area, well, that'd be the lit side, then play down the darks on the light side. And then anything that's going to be light on the dark side, play down that. And I don't mean down like up or down in value. I mean just like, you know, don't make it stand out as much. But overall, this light, the darks overall probably could be brightened up a little bit. These are getting more like stripes and less like just shadows. And we got the light bouncing off of his hand as well. So some of the warmth from that hand is going to be popping up here. And the white picks that up really easy. So that's going to be catching some bounce light down there. This is probably going to be catching a little bit there too. And she's going to be darker compared to whatever. I don't know how light she is, but she's got to be darker than that white fabric. So something on that line. Yep. Okay. Then the hand's going into the shadow this way. Okay, that's cool. And we do have this beautiful blue tone, violet tone back here. Now that also wouldn't be a bad thing to use. You don't have to. This is kind of artistic choice where you could start coming in and using some of this cool tone. I wouldn't use it that bright. Edge it down a little bit. Okay. And let that actually brighten up the tops of these. Then this would be catching some because it's facing upwards as well. And then up there maybe. So anything that's facing upwards to that sky is going to have some of those nice bluer tones, violet tones in it. And again, it's up to you. Like, do you want to make that a big deal, or do you want to be really subtle with it? But I think it would be nice because it would keep some of the shadows from just going so black. That you could have some variation in that black. And it helps you pull out some of the forms on these things. Like this stuff going into the shadow, we'll use a bit more of the blue to pull out some of those shapes. Yeah. The sky is also a place where we could use a second read. Using some, any pattern like this. Let's actually try that out for a second. I'm going to grab this. Keep clicking the wrong one. Let's try like overlay. Yeah, there's overlay. So overlay will give us a bit of the values of one and the colors of the other. And then you can erase out, whatever you don't want. You don't need all that in there. And I wouldn't say that that's the end where you would need to stop with it, but you could establish some sort of cloud pattern that way. I like it a little brighter back there. But that would get you started as far as just making some shapes. And yeah, this would just make the whole thing a little more engaging. The things wouldn't feel so generic. We're trying to add a little more specificity to it, and we're also trying to add more visual interest. So when you look at it, you have more things to look at. Right now, it's just there's no second read. If I look at it longer, I'm not really going to pick up any more details. I don't know that I even marked it. I meant to also mark, so I will say it, is I don't feel like he's looking at her. And I would suggest changing that. Like if you look at the way the eyes are here, you can tell that they're looking down. But the owl feels like he's just looking straight forwards. So taking a look at the, just kind of paint these out a little bit for a second. Taking a look at the reference, I mean, you could have the eyes kind of closing more, right? Where it's like he's looking downwards. And then you have that owl, like, thing that comes down. It's kind of got this I'm sizing you up sort of thing. Now I feel like he's kind of changing his basic look to focus on this guy. So play around with that, see how you can adjust the look of the character so that he's got that proper angle to his vision. Let's see. Okay, that wraps it up for this episode. Let me see. I don't see any more questions or comments to go over. That looks like it. Or maybe the whole thing just froze up. So let me check that. Well, it says it's still streaming with OBS. I don't know what's up with YouTube, but it's not wanting to reload and let me know if there's any new comments. So, too much there. Okay, well, thank you, everybody who joined in on this challenge. There really are some beautiful pieces. I think we have some of the best examples of good imaginative ways of doing things, like the Aurora Borealis effect for the spirit owl, the owl that has the night coming off of it. We've got swords who basically refract light into a frozen effect. We've got a nice example of cel-shaded style characters with painted backgrounds. We haven't really had that before. So really good variety, guys, and I love seeing this stuff. Half the reason that I picked some of the challenges is just I want to see people make images of these things. So it's a little selfish that way, but if you want to get connected and get some feedback from the community, I'm not always able to give feedback on everything, but make sure you're going out to swatches.group, and if you want to pick up a ticket to join in the machine challenge coming up, the machine and the giant, either one you want to do, then check out the tickets on sale tomorrow. I will make a post out on the Facebook group when the tickets go up for sale, and they will be at the Swatches store on Gumroad. SwatchesArt.com will link you there. But that's all we got this time, and I don't see any comments reloading, so I'm going to end it right there. Thank you for your time. Thanks for joining. Until I see you next time, keep drawing.